For the last 5 years, we've been working with NYX boots to make the most indestructible boots that you could actually wear every single day. And for the ND3, we made it to be the perfect boot for the fungal apocalypse. And after almost 1.5 million views, there was a lot of people who disagreed and thought it wasn't the perfect apocalypse boot. So now a couple years later and a season later, we got a well-worn pair, not just to cut in half and run through our tests, but also to really test these boots to the ultimate extreme. The absolute harshest conditions, worst apocalyptic things you could ever potentially run into. And would this work in an actual zombie apocalypse? And what could be improved on this boot after we collect all this information to make the ND5 that we launch in July the ultimate indestructible apocalypse boot. So then what is this boot? Well, the brand is Resole x NYX. The style is the ND3. They weigh just under 3 pounds. They retail for $650. They're made in Spokane, USA. And the way we position this product is basically what we said in the intro, but these are finally available again. After 1.5 million views on that video with tons of emails asking for us to bring it back, we finally convinced NYX to bring back the ND series this year, but this might be the last time. And there's limited quantities, so the link's in the description. There's also a sizing guide, but if you're watching this after they're sold out, get on the email list. You never know, we might be able to convince them for another round, but the ND5 drops soon, and that might be a better version of this boot. So now let's start going through the details, starting with the leather and how it performed. Because this is a really thick leather. It's 3 millimeters thick. It's a wax flesh leather. So instead of that soft, smooth grain being on the outside like you see on most footwear, it's flipped to the inside to protect it. And all these loose suede fibers are on the outside because it makes it a lot more abrasion resistant. You can see like how much abrasion these boots have taken. And that nap still really hasn't worn through. There's no cracks, there's no splits, there's no cuts all the way through. And that's because those loose fibers being on the outside protect that really fine grain pattern. And even more so is this leather, it's not just one layer of leather, because this is a lace to toe pattern where you have 2 layers basically doubled up right in your toe. It's almost like a toe cap that wraps all the way around the boot. And then in true indie fashion, we had to put on the lineman patch. And so in several points, there's 6 to like 12 millimeters of leather protecting you from the outside world, from zombie bites, from anything that you might run into. But speaking of zombie bites, we wanted to run the zombie bite test if a zombie only had one really sharp tooth. And on 1 layer of leather, here's the results. On the 2 layers of leather in the vamp, here's the results. And with the 3 layers counting the alignment patch, here's the results. So I think pretty safe to say you're pretty bite resistant in these. But if there was a weak spot in this leather, you could point to the upper being a little bit weaker because it's just a single layer of leather that's still 3 millimeters thick. But to test that, we want to do the golf club test. You know, you never know when you might run into a golf club or when something might get used against you, against your will. And so we simulated my legs with the dowel for the bone and some really thin foam, and just whacked the crap out of it with a golf club. And it left several dents. It beat the crap out of the boot. Those weren't that impressive results, so we thought we'd take the baseball bat to it. And so Brody beat it with the baseball bat and it finally cracked the dowel, but didn't break it in half. And so I still think with 3 millimeters of this leather wrapping your leg, you are gonna get some protection against breaking. You're gonna get some stability. It's gonna help prevent rolling your ankle, so it really will protect you. And you get the flexibility of only having 1 layer. Because if you look at the inside of this boot, it's unlined through the upper of the boot and actually unlined through the toe of the boot, which is really interesting because usually this kind of boot you see a lining in the vamp, but because it's double layered and we have that alignment patch, this type of boot doesn't really need a lining. And the value of not having a lining in a zombie apocalypse is usually linings are like 1 millimeter thick, they're usually a cheaper cut of leather, and they're a lot more prone to failing than this really thick outer leather. So there's no leather on this boot anywhere that's under 3 millimeters thick because there's no lining. And this video is sponsored by Shopify, one of my favorite tools for running my business. It's literally the biggest tool we use because it's what we built our website on. It's how we use our email campaigns, we use our SEO through that, and they just released the ability to run integrated ads straight from the dashboard. And one of the most effective tools people just completely forget about is the abandoned cart recovery. So if somebody added stuff to their cart, they got to that last click, they didn't click it, it'll automatically send them an email, send them right back where they were. And the best thing about Shopify is it scales with you. Like if you're just one person working on some new idea or you want to test a product or make a new website, you can do it all by yourself, but it can also scale up to the size of our business where we have a few different departments departments, a handful of employees, and all the way up to big corporations that need these tools to run their business. And there really has never been a better time in history to try to start new ideas, start a business. So if you've been sitting on that idea, give it a try. You can do a free trial, you can build out a website, take some pics, see how it feels, and build something in a matter of just a few hours that might completely change the trajectory of your life. So try Shopify today using the links below and support the channel while building something for yourself. And you can start your free trial today at shopify.com/roseanvil. And thanks again to Shopify for sponsoring this video. But what if you fall off a cliff and the one thing that saves you is your laces, and you're hanging on by all that weight, and you don't know if you can trust your speed hooks or your eyelets? So we did a pull test on them, and here's results of the eyelets and the speed hooks. Maybe not as safe as you might want to be, but there's a chance you could be saved by it. But since it's unlined, does that make this boot less water resistant? You know, what if you're trudging through zombie guts and blood, and you know, the blood's usually what's infectious, or at least what's in the blood. And so you do not want that getting to the inside of your boot, because if it gets on a little sore or a blister on your toe, you're infected. So we gave it the zombie blood test, left it in there for 5 minutes, and shockingly, it did not seep through at all, because this is not a waterproof boot, and there's no waterproof lining on the inside. It all comes from this heavily conditioned and waxed leather that basically makes an impermeable layer. And I think it's mostly due to this specific leather, because this is Horween's Chrome XL. It's just a flesh out version, and that leather, they just pack as much oil and conditioning and tanning compounds into this leather as humanly possible. So much so that if you let this kind of boot sit on a shelf for a year, it'll bloom up. It'll get a layer of wax on top because it's literally seeping out. And so for water protection, oil and water, if there's oil in the leather, there's no way it's getting through. And then you might think well, what about the threads? The threads would let it through, and that would be the place that it would get through. But because it's such a thick leather and it's so oil infused, the leather almost collapses around the thread because of how thick it is, and then any oil does absorb into the thread, especially through the cross section, preventing water from getting through. So it's definitely not waterproof for hours and hours in the water, but if you have to hurry and trudge through some guts, you're gonna be fine. Then what about the midsole? This was one of the more controversial things and decisions that we made, because lots of people thought that we should have done a typical leather and rubber outsole combination for the zombie apocalypse. But for me, where you're gonna be walking potentially hundreds and hundreds of miles, I wanted just a little bit of squish, and that's why we ended up going with a foam midsole, because that really deadens every single step you take. That little bit of foam absorbs that shock where a thick piece of leather or that hard rubber won't. And so to see how much it absorbs shock, we did a couple bar drop tests on it. Compared to the ND1 that's more traditionally built, it bounced up 5 inches. The ND3 bounced up just under 4 inches, which means to me that it does deaden that weight that hits the bottom of the boot. But foam will never be nearly as durable as a big piece of leather or some rubber. And especially when you get to harsh chemicals. You know, when it is a zombie apocalypse, nobody's maintaining gas stations, no one's maintaining all these harsh chemicals. You're gonna end up walking through some pretty gnarly stuff, and the last thing you want is your boot to disintegrate from underneath of you. So to test that, we did the acetone test. We just filled up a bucket full of acetone, put the boots in it for quite a long time, and I honestly thought it was gonna completely disintegrate and melt the midsole. But once it was dry, you could really kind of chunk off that midsole. You could push a screwdriver through it. It definitely ruined the integrity of the foam. And I think over the long term, it would lead to delamination. And what's interesting though, is the leather still performed really, really well. I thought for sure once we pulled this out of the acetone and it was dried, that it would be hard as a rock, because I assumed that acetone would leach out all those oils and all that conditioning that we just talked about. But in reality, all it did was strip the wax off the top, and it was in acetone for a long time. And so several points, this leather has really impressed me, and it literally might be the perfect leather for zombie apocalypse. So there's clearly a trade-off, but for me, I'd rather just have a little bit of comfort and gamble on the durability and potentially have to resole it ourselves out in the field. And so to test that, we did a little field resole test, just with basic tools, basic tread that you might be able to find in a zombie apocalypse. And how did it turn out? Oh, look at that. It actually turned out so cool. You know, would this last for hundreds and hundreds of miles compared to Nick's boots putting a nice Vibram Sierra outsole on? No. But if you did have access to glue, you could glue on a tire tread outsole onto these. You know, this is just bike tire. Imagine if you did a car tire. You know, there's so many ways that you could repair these boots, because the weak point clearly is the foam and some of the synthetic materials, and not the upper, not the leather, not the natural materials that you actually need to last for thousands and thousands of miles. But how did the Vibram Sierra outsole perform in the acetone? It performed better than the foam, but it still was affected by the acetone. It started to melt, it started to crumble a little bit. But I also wanted to test the outsole on more than just acetone, because you never know when you might light an entire horde of zombies on fire, walking through flames, walking on hot griddles, I don't know. So we put it on the griddle at 400 degrees, and nothing happened. So we put a hot plate down with a metal sheet, got it up to 800 or 900 degrees, and then it started to melt. And so that's pretty impressive score, because that's not a firefighting outsole. But if we did want to make it a little bit more durable, a little more heat resistant, more acid resistant, we could move from the Sierra to the firefighting sole. But then again, we did the puncture test on the outsole, and it punctured through at 160 pounds, 170 pounds at the heel. So it performed well in the acid test, it performed well in the heat test, it performed well in the puncture test and durability. But what really made this boot possible of resoling and all these different outsole options is the way it's built, because this is a 360 stitch down construction, where instead of the upper being tucked into the boot or glued together or direct injected or Blake stitched on the inside, Goodyear welted on the inside, a stitch down construction flips everything out to the outside and then sews that down through the midsole. And so you would have to wear all the way through the outsole, the midsole, and then into the slip sole to wear through those threads. And because of that, that's what makes these boots so easy to resole. Put a little tire tread on there. You could even get it down and remove all the foam and just glue it straight to that rubber, and you'd still have the complete structure of that construction intact, holding the whole boot together. Versus Nick's other way of making boots with a nailed heel, if you wanted to pull that heel off, you're pulling out nails from the inside of the boot, which might ruin some of the structure of the boot. And so for a repairable zombie apocalypse boot, I still think this 360 stitch down was the way to go. And to prove how durable that stitch down construction is, we had to do a little self-defense test. You never know when you have nothing around you to defend yourself with except for your 3-pound boots. You might have to take them off, maybe one on one arm, kicking with the other. We're just gonna roll the footage to show you what it looks like. So I think you'd be pretty safe, to be honest, if you had to defend yourself with one boot, punching the zombies, flailing the zombies, axing the zombies. So now let's cut these in half and really figure out what's on the inside and how everything held up and what really makes these boots so popular, that give you that deep footprint that will make them comfortable for hundreds and hundreds of miles and durable for hundreds and hundreds of miles. Because if there's one fail point in a boot that you wouldn't be able to fix out in the field, it's all the internal components. So let's cut them in half. All right, we got it cut in half because I'm keeping this one. This one turned out too cool. I'm not cutting it. So let's see what's inside. Look at all that leather. You've got that full-length veg tan insole. That's what's going to give you the longevity and the comfort over an extended period of time, where foam, rubber, any synthetic material will never last as long as this thick of a veg tan insole. That's why they've been doing it in the heaviest duty and the most expensive boots for the last 500 years. And you can see it's supported by a leather shank, and that's going to allow this boot still to flex and bend while still being supportive, breaking into the shape of your foot, and giving you that durability redundantly with 2 layers of that leather. And now you can see what I meant. It's completely unlined in the toe. So I did forget that the tongue was thinner than 3 millimeters, so you could definitely wear through the tongue before that. But you can see the point I was trying to make. You'd have to wear through 3 millimeters of leather and then another 3 millimeters of leather before your toes are exposed to the environment. And if that wasn't enough veg tan, you got that big old heel counter that grips your heel and gives you the stability on any kind of terrain. And you can see there's no nails in the heel. I don't think there's any nails in this construction because it's a 360 stitch down. That's why you get them just a little under 3 pounds, even though it has all these beefy materials. And so the simplicity and the redundancy, I think, is really what makes the inside of this boot the ultimate zombie apocalypse boot. But we haven't ran out of the tests yet. And one of the tests I've been waiting for a long time is the bear trap test. I hunt bears unsuccessfully for 10 years. I don't trap bears, but one of the gnarliest traps of all time is grizzly bear traps. They're like $300 and we finally got one. So now, let's see how these perform in the grizzly bear trap. Are we rolling on everything?
Rolling on main cam, rolling on...
Plug your ears.
Okay, bear trap, $350 bear trap, literally made for grizzly bears, Duke trap, number 16 bear trap. First time setting it, scared as Let's go. 3, 2, 1. Less climactic than I thought.
Then it is
Broke the baseball bat. Good, nice. Okay, big boys. Clear. Woo. Baseball bat. Ooh. Yeah, you can see exactly where it hit right there. I'm shaking because that was so scary. And then yeah, like nothing right there is where you can see where it hit. Not cut through anywhere. Some tough leather. So yeah. So to me, it passed with flying colors. There's maybe a couple little things here and there we could adjust. Maybe we'll roll those in the ND5 to try to make it truly the ultimate apocalypse boot. But I'm pleasantly surprised. I think this turned out, over the last couple years with people wearing them, with all the different tests that we ran, I feel more confident after this video that this is the ultimate zombie apocalypse boot, even more than when we launched them. Because everything performed well. Even the things that maybe didn't perform as well as I thought, they still held up. And more importantly, the upper, all this leather, all this natural materials, that's the stuff that you want to last a long time. And that's really where, to me, this is the ultimate zombie apocalypse boot. But we also have another flamethrower test. So now, let's do the flamethrower test. And if you do want a pair of these, check them out via links in my description. Unless they're sold out, get on that email list for the ND5, or maybe we'll do another restock. And thank you guys for supporting these collaborations. It's what makes the next steps in the business possible, because announcement number 3 is coming up. The giveaway is over today when I'm recording this. So just wait for announcement number 3. So now, flamethrower test.